Let's begin Chapter 6, Rewiring Faulty Thinking Patterns. We'll start with a quote from Henry David Thoreau. A single footstep will not make a path on the earth. So a single thought will not make a pathway in the mind. To make a deep physical path, we walk again and again. And to make a deep mental path, we must think over and over the kind of thoughts we wish to dominate our lives. So this is exactly what we're going to be exploring in this chapter. Our actual power to reprogram ourselves, regardless of what we've been taught or what we believe. We have the power to see the world differently, and it doesn't start with just a flip of a switch or the emotional feeling that this new thing is true, but it begins with the power of simple repetition. And that's going to be the most important thing we talk about through this chapter. So what do I really mean when we say rewire your brain? It was actually in the last 25 years or so that we understand that our brains are plastic. And what that means is it used to be understood or thought that we only get so many brain cells, and then when we lose them, that the brain becomes fixed. Meaning that it can't learn new things. Now, we understand that that is actually a faulty interpretation. Our brain, actually, we have many, many brain cells when we are a small child. And as we grow older, the brain does prune away what is no longer useful. But what that means is then the associations and the pathways that we have throughout the brain become very, very strong. And when we say neuroplastic, what we mean is that the brain can rewire and form new pathways. And it actually happens all the time. And we can use that to our advantage to rewire our own brains when we get stuck in faulty thinking, whether or not that's cognitive distortions or negative beliefs such as I'm not worthy or I'm not good enough or nobody loves me. That can feel true, we can believe it to be true, and we can even look for evidence that it's true, but it's not absolute truth. For example, people often reference the idea of is the glass half full or half empty? Well, they're actually both true. We have a choice in which way we want to view that glass. And we want to take that kind of concept and now apply it to our own lives. And essentially what it means is we can't actually believe everything we think. Not everything we think is absolute truth. If you walk past your boss's door and their door's shut and you think, oh, the boss is mad at me, well, that might be true to your lived experience. You're feeling that, you might be believing that, but that's not the absolute truth. We don't know that that's true. And so one of the really interesting ways of working with ourselves is starting to be able to actually ask ourselves again, do I know that to be true? Could there be other ways to interpret this? Do I need to rebranch out in my brain and my interpretations in order to see the world differently? And again, it's one of those examples of it's not a problem unless it's a problem. So however you see the world is just fine and perfect for you as long as it's working for you. So again, we're looking at this stuff and we're looking to change it if you've come to the decision or the awareness that your viewpoint is not working for you. Is it causing you pain or suffering? So what we want to first think about is something called cognitive distortions. They are ways of looking at the world that can lead us to perceive or interpret the world in inaccurate ways. They often reinforce negative emotions or beliefs, and they can interfere with problem solving and decision making. So here's an example of cognitive distortions. Disqualifying the positive. What does that really mean? Disqualifying the positive is an example of, let's say you get a small raise at work, but you didn't get a bonus. If you come home and you are distraught or stressed or feeling like I'm not doing good enough at work or I might get fired, and somebody suggests well, you still got a raise, well, that doesn't matter. All these other things are still happening. So it's a way of throwing away the evidence to the contrary if what you believe is I'm probably likely to be fired or I'm not valued at work. So we can throw away the positive evidence. We have a way of actually just dismissing it almost like it doesn't even register. Overgeneralization, that's an example of taking a viewpoint and acting like that applies to everything. Basically seeing things as all bad or all good. Usually if it's a cognitive distortion that's causing you pain, you're not necessarily seeing things as all good, although that could still become a problem in relationships. So overgeneralizing, that's kind of like an example of absolutes. Oh, well, he's always talking bad, or they're always angry. So kind of using shoulds, always, those kinds of things. In your workbook, you've got a whole list of how to really start to recognize cognitive distortions in your own life and to be able to really start to understand which ones you tend to use the most. Because again, the idea here is we want to recognize our own patterns in the way that we think. A pattern is a mental pathway that we have just repeated often enough that it becomes habit. And so sometimes these habits are no longer really that attuned to our authentic selves or who we are today. If you formed this mental habit many years ago or even in childhood, and this program might still be running inside of you without it feeling relevant or helpful to the person you are today. So once you've identified your cognitive distortions, here are some interventions that you can do to start to separate yourself from this manner of thinking. And again, this is a really strange kind of internal process because you're using your observer self as a way to look at your own thoughts and to start to intervene with them. I think sometimes it kind of feels like mutiny, to be honest, when we have to look at our thoughts and learn how to put them aside. So one of the ways that's really useful with working with thought patterns is sometimes using pictures or symbolism. And the first tip here is to put negative things in a box. And I mean actually visualize a box. Maybe you imagine in your mind's eye a bookshelf, and there's a box on that bookshelf. And whenever you find yourself having a thought that falls into one of those cognitive distortion categories, imagine taking that thought, maybe crumple it up like a piece of paper, put it in the box. And imagine this box starts to hold all of these different examples of the cognitive distortion. And that helps you also start to separate your patterned habitual thoughts versus more of your authentic thoughts. It helps you separate yourself. Also, a really helpful one is to depersonalize things. If you are saying to yourself, if you catch yourself in that inner critic saying, I'm stupid, I'm no good, one of the tasks that you can do is start to acknowledge that you feel stupid, but that's not the same thing as I am stupid. So depersonalize it even further. And especially when it comes to inner critic kind of voice and language, if you wouldn't say it to a friend or you wouldn't say it out loud, then that's not fair conversation as a way to have self-talk internally. So start to catch yourself when you're in that inner critic. You might even want to give that inner critic a name. I've had a couple of clients think of it as the parrot. You're so stupid. And it's a way, again, to bring a little humor into it, but also to start to separate it out and to start to see, oh gosh, I talk like that. That inner parrot comes out 50 times a day. Imagine how much that repetition is influencing your emotional state. Number 6 is naming your stories. I'm telling myself a story that I'm not valued. I'm telling myself a story that I'm not lovable. I'm telling myself a story that I'm not good at my job, right? So you start to be able to name those narratives that we often carry. And let's move into limiting beliefs because it's similar to cognitive distortions, but they're thought of just a little bit differently. They typically stem from 3 categories, limiting beliefs. They're either based on personal defectiveness, sense of safety, or sense of power. So I'd like you to notice if any of these limiting beliefs resonate with you. And you'll know they resonate with you because you might feel triggered when you hear those words. You feel typically a kind of a sensation in your body that feels like it recognizes it. And you'll notice because you'll be able to compare some of these things just don't land. You don't relate to them. So they don't feel true for you. I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. I don't belong. I'm ugly. Those are examples of defectiveness, sense of defectiveness. I can't trust anyone, or it's not okay to show my emotions. Those are examples of safety, limiting beliefs around safety. I can't get what I want. I can't trust myself. I can't handle it. I have to be perfect. Those are examples of limiting beliefs around personal power. Now, it's important to understand here, let's take it's not okay to show my emotions. That certainly might have been a very true and lived experience in your life. Well, let's say, for example, growing up, you lived in a home where it wasn't safe to have emotions, either because your caregivers couldn't take care of you when you were having emotions, and so you learned it'd be better not to have needs. Or maybe if you were emotional, it put them into a place of anxiety or depression, and so that you also learned it's not safe to express my emotions. There's many reasons why we learn it's not okay to show my emotions. Now, what we're talking about here is that when you learn that at an early age, that becomes a subconscious belief. It's an operating program. It's a way that you've learned to live your life to help keep you safe and to help you survive. So what we're starting to look at here now is that how much has that programming become such a constant truth that it hasn't come up to be updated or reevaluated in your life. Now, as an adult, you've likely learned more tools or found new circumstances where there are some areas where it would be okay to show your emotions. Or it might be so true that you haven't allowed yourself to feel your own emotions in a long time that you don't even know if it's okay or not. You don't even think about it. So we want to be able to give ourselves the time and the space to examine these old limiting beliefs and to see how they're still showing up in our world now. And then specifically like how to give our brain these updates, just like we update our computers all the time. Often limiting beliefs start when we're very young, when we have a child's-like experience in the world. And then without direct support, these things can stay subconscious running our lives all the way through adulthood. So the goal here is to start to get really conscious and ask yourself some questions. What is some of these limiting beliefs that might be running in my programming and operating in the background of how I view life? And then the fact that they might not be absolutely true. They might have been true at one point. And that's valid. And we actually need a tremendous amount of like compassion and self-acknowledgement about the difficulties that must have happened to us when we were younger, big or small difficulties. And to be able to actually acknowledge that is part of also how we then move forward and create new beliefs. There's actually an author, Kate Byron, whose work is known as The Work, and she brings it down to these 4 sentences that are a wonderful way to begin to ask yourself what's going on with your thought process and to start to build some questioning inside. I don't feel lovable, or it's not safe to have my emotions. Ask yourself, is it true? Can I absolutely know that it's true? Then ask yourself, how do I react when I believe this thought? And who would I be without this thought? And that's an example of like kind of stretching your brain. It can be really hard to imagine if you've always carried a sense of like have imposter syndrome. It's hard to even imagine an identity without that. But we want to start imagining that because that is what then helps us reshape our world and make our world bigger so that we can step into new ways of being. So cognitive behavioral therapy is about understanding our thoughts and our behaviors and our ability to make change with them. And in today's world, we use the words like affirmations quite a lot. So there's a lot of science actually behind affirmations, even though people reference them a lot in like kind of like new age things. But affirmations really play on neuroplasticity, the fact that our brains change and they adapt to new learning, and that we are entirely capable of reprogramming ourselves. So it's kind of like watering a garden. What you water will grow. So if you water the fear thoughts, you're going to have more fear thoughts. If you water new thoughts, such as, I'm willing to see this differently, that is going to start to increase your own experience. It's going to change your mindset. It's actually going to change the way your brain looks for new evidence. And remember that it's about curiosity and compassion. We really need to have those two emotional tools with us as much as possible so that we don't fall into inner critic. And again, what's most essential is just simply repetition. Oftentimes when it comes to reprogramming, or whether or not you want to call it affirmations or not, these things don't always feel true. So I want to acknowledge, you can't go from saying like, I hate my body to I love my body. It won't feel true because it's not a pathway that's been walked often enough. There's no belief attached to it. There's no emotion attached to it. So the idea in the beginning is base it on repetition, to repeat to yourself. And you might choose something that feels a little bit more possible. So I feel neutral about my body. That might be a place to even start. Like find something that you're willing and open to seeing differently, and then beginning to repeat it. Here are some examples of affirmations, which I find really helpful because often when our brains are in lockdown, our imagination is not as robust or available to us. So here are just a few examples. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good enough. Small progress is still progress. Just because it happened once doesn't mean it will always happen. This setback doesn't define my whole experience. There are many different outcomes, not just worst case scenario. And I can prepare for the future without assuming the worst. And one of your exercises to do at the end of this chapter is to really build out what are going to be some of your updates, affirmations, or reprogrammings. What are some things that you would really like to challenge yourself to start to see differently? So remember, the cup is half full and half empty. They're both true. You get to choose how you want to view things. And in psychology, it's named reframing. And remember that we talked about in the anatomy chapter, the RAS in the brain. It's actually our filter for what we notice based on what's important to us. So as we reprogram ourselves, the RAS changes as well. So then that's based on repetition. Remember that the subconscious mind doesn't think. It doesn't think consciously. It just reacts. Excuse me. And so we are either can pilot our life or we're on autopilot. And that's a lot of what we're starting to talk about here, is how to move into a conscious place where you are piloting or driving your own ship. And remember, in the beginning, it won't feel 100% true at the start. And that is perfectly normal. In fact, you might be able to find a small part where it feels true. Like a little minority voice or a whisper inside. And so sometimes you can start to learn how to speak from that place, the part of you that truly believes it's possible to change, or it's possible to feel differently. So that is another way of kind of like working with some of these things, is to find the smaller parts of you, the less loud parts of you that actually believe in this new way of thinking. They might not feel it to be true again, but they actually do believe I am good enough, or I can move through this world successfully. One of my favorite, honestly, most valuable affirmations to use, because this works in any situation, I am willing to see this differently. I'm willing to see this differently. If there's one thing that you take away from this whole chapter, it's the power of this phrase, I'm willing to see this differently. And that reminds us that oftentimes the things that we experience in life, now we can't change the facts of what's happened to us, but we can start to move around and look at things from different angles. And certain angles are going to cause more pain and suffering, and certain angles are going to help us lessen that. And you are allowed and empowered to be able to navigate your life and to be able to view things It's still rational, and it's not a Pollyanna kind of thing to discount positive, but to be able to say like, oh, when I look at it this way, I have more peace inside. There's no need for you to carry chronic suffering. And again, that's sometimes what happens with our negative beliefs, our cognitive distortions, is that we have a way of enhancing or keeping our suffering alive. And what we want to be able to do is to be able to honor suffering when it happens, to deeply actually acknowledge it when it's happening and acute and alive in our lives, and then also to allow it to naturally move on its way when it's time for it to pass. I am willing to see this differently. And here are some reflections to use and embody within this chapter. Go through the cognitive distortions and ask which ones are most familiar. And then take it a little deeper. How has this distortion colored my view of myself and colored my view of the world? How can I recognize, challenge, and reframe this distortion? And then specifically go through and think about, are there any distortions you would add to that list? Like any things that are like personal to you or personal to your family? Okay, thank you for completing this chapter.